Today's community conversation is an interview with local historian and LGBTQ historian David Williams, who's written a book on the secrets of Old Louisville and has written a blog post for us on the Louisville Pride website talking about the secret history of gay Old Louisville. But before we talk with David, I want to do a virtual vendor spotlight, and today we're going to look at the ACLU. They're going to come up as dropping the ball in the interview with David, but they are, generally speaking, they're on the right side of things. So we're going to talk with Kate Miller about that. Welcome to our virtual vendor spotlight as part of our community conversation series. Today, we're going to talk about the ACLU, which has been a supporter of the LGBTQ community for a long time and is a sponsor of Digital Pride. So joining me today is Kate Miller.
The mission of the ACLU is to protect and defend the rights that are enumerated in the United States and Kentucky Constitution, namely the Bill of Rights or the civil liberties afforded through the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. A lot of our work is spent advocating for changes at the statewide level and, of course, working really closely with the Fairness Campaign on those initiatives and also working really closely with the Fairness Campaign on defeating anti-LGBTQ legislation. But what we've been trying to do more of is have smaller mini lobby days where folks can interact more intimately with legislators, get to know their local legislator, and have an opportunity to build a relationship with the lawmaker. So if you're interested in that, that's a great way to get active with us. We've also been supporting the work of Ban Conversion Therapy Kentucky. Again, we're not the lead organization, it's Ban Conversion Therapy Kentucky, but we've been following their lead and supporting their lobby day at least for the last 2 years and working on promoting that legislation and trying to educate lawmakers on the need for that legislation as well.
And so normally you all you'd have a presence at the Pride festivals and people would come up to the booth. And tell me just a little bit about what kind of conversations do you have at the booth with people?
We work on a whole lot of different issues. We take a lot of different positions. If you are familiar with the ACLU, you probably disagree with at least something that we've done, and trust me, that puts you in good company. So, but you can also usually find an area where we can have some opportunity to work together too. A lot of the historic actions done by the ACLU have been around free speech. They've been around freedom of religion, but they've also expanded to criminal justice reform when you're thinking about whether or not people have fair access to the courts. I mean, that's a really important issue. And we know that we talk about like LGBTQ rights or criminal justice reform, but in reality, all of these issues intersect with each other because we know that LGBTQ folks, I think in particular trans folks, are disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. And we also know that the rights of LGBTQ folks who are incarcerated are often the most severely oppressed. A lot of the work that we do on different issue areas actually really intersect with each other in a way that provides us with an opportunity to have increased power, but also reflects the reality that people are living in because we all represent different identities and have different experiences. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's so great to build relationships between folks, and particularly between the lawmakers that we're working with and individuals who have direct experience with the issues that we're working on. There are so many ways for folks to get involved in a variety of different organizations. I'll say if you're interested in policy specifically or statewide policy, I think that we're a good organization to connect with. You can come to one of our events, you can donate. That's one of the best ways to support us, is to invest in the work. And then of course, we're always looking for new leaders to join our board and help oversee and govern the organization.
Today, I'm talking to David Williams, who is a local historian on LGBTQ and Louisville issues. Thank you for joining me today, David.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Williams-Nichols Institute?
The Williams-Nichols Institute was founded in 1982 as part of GLUE, which at that time was the coalition group that had been founded advocate for gay issues in Louisville. It was the first major group in Louisville before Fairness, now known as the Williams-Nichols Institute. It's named, well, for me, but more for Norman Nichols, who at the time was my lover, who had AIDS, and I wanted to memorialize him somehow. So I thought this would be the perfect thing. And about 8 months after we incorporated, he died. So this institute is partly in memory of him. We now are the corporate sponsors of what's known as the Williams-Nichols Collection, which is in the Department of Archives and Special Collections at the University of Louisville. And it's one of the, we believe, 10 largest LGBTQ archives and libraries in the country now.
And you mentioned GLUE. Was that an acronym? Did that stand for something?
Yes, it stood for Gays and Lesbians United for Equality. And basically, it was a coalition group. There was a lot of groups forming in 1982. And these people, Elizabeth Stith and Samuel Dorr and Jack Kersey, felt that we needed to bring everybody together under one umbrella to coordinate our activities and to share information. So it was founded in the spring of 1982. And it lasted till about 1997, I believe. Correct. In 1970, almost exactly a year after Stonewall, a group of people came together over here in Old Louisville on Belgravia Court to found the Gay Liberation Front. And they formed in response to an attempt by two lesbians to get a marriage license from the Jefferson County Courthouse clerk. The clerk turned them down, and so they sued. They lost. But from 1970 to 71, the GLF was very active here in Louisville. They had their own house over in the Highlands for a while. They had the first gay and lesbian hotline. They did other things. They had some small protests even. But it was busted up after the police raided their house looking for marijuana, ostensibly. And it scared everybody away, and the group disintegrated. After that, there really wasn't a whole lot of activity until GLUE came along in 1982. Originally, of course, Old Louisville was the enclave of the wealthy and the powers that be in Louisville. We've had 52 mayors in Louisville's history. 12 of them came from Old Louisville. So, it was like that up until about 1920. The problem with these old houses down here is they were built about the same time as they were going out of date. New homeowners and landlords started coming in the 1920s and 30s, and they were just looking to just make money. So they busted up these houses into boarding rooms and apartments. Some of these houses had once been single family, but they had been turned into 12 or 14 different apartments. And you can imagine these landlords were just kind of looking to rent. They didn't care who rented it or what. They didn't ask too many questions. So it's about that time that the gay and lesbian population started gravitating towards Old Louisville. It was a safe haven. We get our first glimpse of the gay presence in Old Louisville around 1936 during this gay murder scandal. But it kind of developed in 1951. People were complaining about gay men having sex in the bushes in Central Park and stuff like this. So from about that time on, Old Louisville came to be known widely in the gay and lesbian community as well as the straight community as a gay enclave. So it's been that way for about 90 years. At that time, up until 1992, you could get arrested for having sex with another person of the same gender and go to prison for 2 years. So there was, in Kentucky, some states were even worse. Idaho, I think they said 50 years. So it was a pretty bad time for gays and lesbians. So it was very brave to be out and to be proud. In fact, very little of that until the 80s. It was just, you feared about losing your job, about your family finding out, about being evicted from your apartment, on and on. So there was a very lively gay and lesbian presence in Louisville through the 70s, but it was very quiet, much like most other cities. A new book that has come out is called The Deviant War by Dr. Eric Cervini, who is online on Facebook quite a lot. It tells the case of Dr. Franklin Kameny, who was an astronomer with the federal government, and he worked with NASA. In 1956, he was detained in San Francisco for lewd activity in a bathroom in San Francisco, and this finally got back to his superiors in the federal government, and he was fired because he was gay. Well, he would have none of it. He said, there's no reason for me to be fired because of something that I might do in the privacy of my own home, or it doesn't matter whether I'm gay, I can still do my job. Why are you firing me? And he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. He contacted JFK and Robert Kennedy about it. He found no support from any side. Even the ACLU at the time would not take up his case. So he was basically one lone man fighting against the system, fighting against the man. He took the case all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. But in the meantime, he started a group called the Mattachine Society of Washington, D.C., which was a very early gay rights activist group. And he was one of the first people to organize a protest for gay rights in front of the White House in 1965. And by that time, he had gathered a few other people to help him out. And so it was a very slow, steady drip all throughout the 60s.
It's the daughters, I can never remember, the Daughters of Bilitis.
Yeah, and Bilitis was a word that they got from a novel that had been written in France a few decades earlier. But they were more of a social group at first and not really activists. These women were tired of going to the bars, and they just wanted to have a place to meet and socialize and have softball games and stuff like that. And it was founded in 1956, and it thrived until the early 70s when the more activist movement took over the gay and lesbian community. But they were very active. They even had a magazine which they published once a month called The Ladder. And we have almost every copy of that in our archives, along with most of the other early publications as well. Yeah, I was from 1956 to 1972. And there again, it was not strictly an activist publication. It was more of a means by which lesbians were able to find each other. And it was they published a couple of thousand copies each month and sent it through the mail to lesbians all over the country. And they were the very first gay or lesbian publication that actually had a photograph of a real live lesbian on the cover. This was kind of a revolutionary act. This has happened back in 1959, I believe. They actually showed a lesbian's face. And not even the gay men would do that with their other publications like the Mattachine Review or One magazine. So they pushed the envelope slowly, just like all the other organizations before Stonewall.
Did they have trouble sending that through the mail?
Uh, there was a very famous case that came out of 1954. There was a magazine called One, O-N-E, which it was mailed all across the country, but the U.S. Postal Service got a hold of a copy and declared that it was obscene. There was no obscenity in the magazine, but it's just for the fact that it was a magazine that was celebrating homosexuality and, putting a positive light on it. So they sued to have the magazine pulled from the post office. They destroyed thousands of copies of it. Well, the organization behind the magazine sued, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. This was one of the very early victories that we had in 1958, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was not obscene, that there was no lewd or pornographic pictures in it of any kind. And so they allowed this magazine, One magazine, to be mailed. So that's what was the opening for all the publications that we have seen since. The Advocate, Out magazine, they are free thanks to this 1958 ruling to mail the magazine to the public through the mail.
And, in those days, I mean, that was the only way to get connected to a larger gay and lesbian culture. We had 3 TV channels, no internet, and you had if you were lucky, you might be tapped into a social network of, an actual social network of people.
Yes. Yeah. At the time, the gay and lesbian community was very atomized. It was very local. I mean, you could kind of figure out over time where the gathering places were and all that, but you didn't know anything about Chicago, New York, nothing. There were gay bar listings you could buy here and there, but you had to figure out where do you get a copy. So it was very, very isolated. Most gay men and lesbians and transgenders, as the 60s progressed, just didn't know where to go. Oddly enough, and this is how I found out about a lot of stuff, I learned it from my straight friends. They said, "Oh, don't go to Central Park. There's something shady going on there." And I thought, "Oh, hey, where's Central Park?" So, and even my mom, my brother went to a picnic in Cherokee Park once, and she told him before he left, she said, "Well, don't go to this particular section in Cherokee Park." And I thought, "Oh, that's where you go to look for gay men."
Did you mentioned, your straight friends at the time. Were you out to anyone at that time?
No, not at all. I mean, I got bullied. People suspected that I was gay, but so I hid very assiduously, whatever I could do to avert attention from that. I didn't have my first sexual experience until I was 21, but I didn't really come out until I was 25 after the Army. So I was kind of a late bloomer.
And were you out, when you came out, were you out, or was it, don't ask, don't tell sort of situation?
Oh, yeah. I was out, at the bars. The gay bars were a liberating effect. I went into my first gay bar on May 13th, 1973. And I thought
Red letter day.
I had found paradise. I had found my island. There was before that date, my life, and then after that date, it just totally changed. I looked around and thought, oh my God, all these men. And then I found out that, they were looking at me. So it was a big revelation. After 1973, I was out as far as going to the gay community. I had my own small circle of friends, but not publicly. I didn't really come out publicly until the 80s.
What was that bar?
Oh, yes, it was called the Badlands Territory, which in 1981, the name was changed to the Discovery. And it was the first gay disco in Louisville. They had a fabulous dance floor up on the second floor that lit up just like it's Saturday Night Live. And I've heard that the dance floor is still there. It's a different bar now, but straight bar.
Do you know what bar it is now?
Oh, Barbarella, I believe it's right over there. At First and or Brook and
Main Street. Yeah, that's been a lot of different bars over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking back to those days when you would go to the bars, was it all gay men? Were there people, and I know people were not using the term transgender back then, but were there transgender people? Were there lesbians there? Was it an all white crowd? Was it mixed?
Yeah, the Badlands Territory tended to be 95% gay men. Very few lesbians, I think, ever went there. And again, it was mostly white. There was a few blacks. But now there was a second bar, which was very popular, which was much more diverse, called the Downtowner. And that was down the street across, First Street. It's where the Distill Hotel is now. And it attracted everybody, blacks, whites, transgenders. One of the drag performers there was an early transgender who transitioned. So it was a very lively crowd. They had a drag show in the back. They had a small dance floor in the front. And then it expanded eventually to the second floor to a bar called The Loft, and to the basement for a lesbian bar called Ladies' Choice. So it was very vibrant. Wednesday nights, especially drink and drown night, you don't want to be there. But Fridays and Saturdays, it was the place to be for almost everybody. But then also for gay men, mostly the Badlands and Discovery.
And were there other places for people to meet other than, I mean, you had the bars, you had the bushes in Central Park. Was that it?
Well, Central Park, there was a lot of cruising up and down 4th Street between Central Park and Broadway. A library circle in front of the public library. Sometimes on Saturday and Friday nights, cars would just circle around and around, everybody cruising each other, checking each other out, and then not having sex there, just going home together. But up and down 4th Street, it was a very lively cruising area. Cherokee Park has always been the place to go in public. There's a lot of shady areas, a lot of trees and woods. You could meet discreetly and then go home. Sometimes not go home, but there was a few other bars also. The Odyssey, which was over here at Oak and Preston Street. Way out in the county on Cane Run Road was a lesbian bar called Aunt Nora's. There was a lesbian bar on Market Street called Mother's Brew. And there was off and on other little gay bars and lesbian bars that would pop up and stay for a while and then leave. We've got a whole list at the archives.
Thank you to David Williams from the Williams-Nichols Archives and Kate Miller from the ACLU for joining me today on Community Conversations. We'll see you next time.